Hi everybody! In this video I'm going to be analyzing if we can make predictions from history about the succession of the Iron Throne. Full disclosure, I'm not a historian, I'm actually a screenwriter and I just happen to have a degree in ideological history for funsies. Yay! That being said, this is very generalized and if you want to learn more, I really suggest doing further research. The Wars of the Roses was a war of succession between the houses of the Yorks and the Lancasters. And if you can't figure out which one of those represents which house in Game of Thrones, then you should probably think about your life. Henry VI sat on the throne with his Queen Margaret of Anjou. He was more or less rumored to be insane, feeble-minded. He experienced several mental breakdowns, and so people began to challenge his reign.
Well, I didn't vote for you!
It's not very hard to draw connections between the historical figure of Henry VI and the Mad King Aerys Targaryen. The noble houses of England and France split their loyalties between the Yorks, they were called the Yorkists, and the Lancasters, the Lancastrians. The Wars of the Roses ended when Henry VII defeated Richard III on the battlefield. For those of you who don't remember, Richard III is actually the giant dickbag from Shakespeare's play, also called Richard III. I actually think Richard III was an okay king, but that's besides the point. So now we have the Tudor era, and this is where it gets really interesting politically, and where I believe George R.R. Martin actually pulled the inspiration for a lot of the characters from A Game of Thrones. I mean, logically, the author and the showrunners might not base the end of their stories completely on history because they do want to surprise us, but these are predictions based on the idea that they do follow history. Henry VII is supposedly a usurper. He supports the house of the Lancasters, but he actually descends from the line of Prince John. Prince John is the one person whose family were actually barred from inheriting the English throne. And you can learn more about that if you want to study Richard the Lionheart and Prince John, but that's a totally different video. Henry VII, the Lancaster, ends a lot of the fighting by marrying Elizabeth of York. They wind up having a son who we know as Henry VIII. In his youth, Henry VIII was a celebrity. He was an athlete, he was an expert jouster, he was popular, he was cultured, he actually was very sensitive and had all these romantic ideals. Sitting on the throne had made him irritable and antsy, and he was just not a great king. By the time Henry VIII kicks the bucket from syphilis, he's morbidly obese, has gout, smells pretty bad, and has a reputation for not being very nice to the ladies. And of course, it's not very hard to draw similarities between this very romantic, chivalric, athletic youth who then declines and becomes a sort of fallen hero who's plagued by paranoia, this character of Henry VIII, and George R.R. Martin's character of Robert Baratheon. I actually consider Henry VII and Henry VIII to be more or less an amalgamation into the character of Robert Baratheon in the world of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. There is a theory that Henry VIII was actually going to legitimize his bastard son from his mistress, Elizabeth, or Bessie, Blount.
Bessie! Thank the gods for Bessie.
This son was named Henry Fitzroy. He died fairly young in his teens, on paper by disease. People speculate that it may have actually been poison. A lot of people didn't trust in the divinity of an adopted heir, and they didn't necessarily want this bastard who's a wild card to rule their country. And of course, this mercurial, untrustworthy youth is very similar to Joffrey Baratheon, who is the bastard son of Robert Baratheon and who winds up poisoned at the Purple Wedding. Next to inherit the throne after Henry VIII is his son, Edward VI. Edward inherits the throne as a really young kid. He's super gullible, he's pushed around, he's manipulated mostly by his uncle Thomas Seymour and by the family of his mother. They're all ardent Protestants. They actually push Edward to start converting England fully into a Protestant nation. Of course, Henry VIII had done this before, but he had always remained more or less Catholic and was sort of just doing it for the divorce. Edward VI has a striking resemblance to Tommen Baratheon, who is also easily manipulated, very young, and under the thumb of his mother's family. And here's where we surpass even the show and move into the predictions phase of this video. Moving forward, I'm only going to be referencing the show, the reason being that the show has surpassed the novel, so I'm going to use all of the information that I have. Edward VI catches ill, again, possibly poison. Because Joffrey died of poisoning, I think it's unlikely that D&D are going to kill off Tommen in the same way. Possibly he could catch ill, possibly helping the poor on the whims of the sparrows. Or if I were to approach this as a screenwriter, I think he might get thrown out of the Red Keep just to parallel Bran's story. Actually, while editing this video, a theory crossed my mind. Tommen finds out that he's a bastard, lashes out at Cersei, and then Robert Strong fully pushes him out of the Red Keep. And that's one of those, like, be careful what you wish for moments for Cersei. Here's where it gets really interesting. Going back to the Tudor succession, Edward VI was supposed to leave the throne to his sister, Mary. But in his delirious state, his mother's family convinces him to leave the throne instead to his cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane comes to London, has a small coronation, and then is immediately thrown into the Tower and imprisoned. There is a more popular choice for Queen, Henry VIII's first daughter, Mary Tudor. Now, I actually believe that the inspiration for two characters could have come from either Jane Grey or Mary. I'm going with the assumption that Lady Jane Grey is actually Cersei Lannister. If Tommen is dying, Cersei and Jaime could convince him to actually leave the throne to his mother, maybe as a queen regent or just as the de facto queen. It's not too far-fetched to imagine that she would be thrown out in favor of a different candidate for queen. Interestingly enough, Mary Tudor has the initials MT, and her sigil is the rose. Of course, Margaery Tyrell's initials are also MT, and her sigil is also a rose. She's much more popular than Cersei, and it's not too far-fetched to think that if Tommen left no heir, people might prefer her to Cersei Lannister. Mary was not actually known for being a particularly kind queen. She burned devout Protestants at the stake, and while people didn't necessarily side with all of the Protestants, even Catholics were appalled to see their neighbors burned alive. I mean, because then who would water their plants when they go on vacation? Given Margaery's history with the Sparrows, it's completely possible that she might actually work to destroy the Faith Militant, and that some of the people may see this negatively. As well, both Mary Tudor and Margaery Tyrell experienced some degree of psychological torture. Margaery Tyrell was, of course, imprisoned by the Sparrows. Mary was sent away from court from the love of her father, who she adored. She was prevented from seeing her mother even on her mother's deathbed. She constantly complained of being very cold. They didn't send her enough clothes. Of course, going from being a princess to being a bastard was very hard on her, but because she would never relent and say that Anne Boleyn was the true Queen of England, she continued in this state. Mary was considered very bright, loving, beautiful, the ideal princess before she was bastardized. She came out as a different woman, and this is the woman that many of us remember. I feel like Margaery may be a different person or may make choices that may make her be perceived differently. Mary Tudor dies of natural causes. It's totally possible Margaery Tyrell could too, or maybe she might just be ousted and decide to take off and go back to Highgarden or take off to Essos. Now, Mary lost a lot of popularity by marrying Prince Philip of Spain, and Spain was the enemy of England for a long time. Knowing this, it's completely possible that Margaery, after the death of Tommen, may seek to find peace with Dorne by marrying into the Dornish royal family, and this could cause her to lose a lot of popularity. After the death of Mary, the throne is left to someone who no one ever expected would inherit the throne because she was so far down the line of succession. She's a beautiful, red-headed girl, Queen Elizabeth I, otherwise known as the Virgin Queen because she never married. Elizabeth I was raised knowing that she was a threat to the crown and that she could be arrested and killed at any moment. She was essentially a gilded prisoner. I'm pretty sure most of you have already guessed that this beautiful red-headed queen is easily comparable to Sansa Stark. Sansa went through many of the same experiences as Elizabeth and grew from a fairly sheltered princess, as it were, into a very political, powerful woman. Of course, Elizabeth I was sexually abused in her youth, as was Sansa, by actually a number of people. Now, what's interesting is Sansa doesn't seem like she would even want to sit on the Iron Throne. She might want to be queen in the north, I can imagine that, but I can't imagine her wanting to leave Winterfell ever again, unless it meant protecting something greater, and it meant sacrificing sacrificing something that was really important to her, possibly a family member, possibly her ancestral seat. Now, we've already established from Cersei Lannister the theme of A Game of Thrones.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
You win or you die. I believe that Sansa is either going to take over as Queen in the North or as Queen of Queen of Westeros, because she'll have no other choice. It will be between that and death for her and for her family and for those that she loves. Following in Elizabeth I's footsteps, I don't believe Sansa's going to marry again. Elizabeth knew very well how much a man could take away your autonomy. She knew that if she got married, that man would then take power over her. Sansa has had a very troubled relationship with men, and I think she'll do anything to preserve her own autonomy and power, especially once she gets control of either the North or of the entire kingdom of Westeros. Anyway, interested in hearing what your thoughts are on these predictions and analyses. Do you think on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being like, this is totally plausible, to 1 being like, you're totally full of shit? Well, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, you don't know me, so whatever, man, it's cool. If you do want to learn more about the Wars of the Roses, though, and the history of Tudor England and the Renaissance and medieval eras, I actually suggest a couple of books. They are The Western Heritage, so aptly named because it covers the heritages of those who are Western, and Early Modern England. And these are both textbooks that I bought for about $100, and then when I tried to resell them, they offered me 50 cents. So I kept them out of spite. But they're actually really good books, so like read them or torrent them, I don't know, whatever kids do with your clouds and stuff now.